Far Cry villains. These big bads are responsible for some of gaming's most intimidating, iconic big bads. And today we are going to be ranking all of them from worst to best in tier list format. Just to give you guys a quick heads up, I am incredibly sick, so if my commentary sounds a little bit off or a little bit cranky, that's most likely why. So, without wasting any more of your time, let's immediately get started with talking about the very first villain we encounter in this series. Now, the very first villain we encounter in this series is none other than Krieger, and he unfortunately doesn't make much of a memorable impact for me. Every single thing about this character is boring and forgettable. I suppose the only somewhat fun idea this character explores is him turning into a fucking hunter from Resident Evil. But then again, at the end of the day, Krieger is bland as fuck and is hardly in the game. I think he's literally in the game for like 10 minutes, it's fucking pathetic. So, for all those reasons, he's going to go in the mid tier. Taking a step into Far Cry 2, we're met with none other than the Jackal, who is a great step in the right direction. Now, there's so many things I enjoy about this character. The fact that this is Jack Carver from Far Cry 1 is super interesting, and really adds a lot of cool context and intrigue surrounding his evolution into the Jackal. You can really see how they elaborated on the villain archetype in this game, with most of the Jackal's cutscenes being these long monologues that explores philosophical ideas and concepts. Which was honestly a fantastic idea that'll only lay the groundwork for more memorable examples in the future. Honestly, everything about the Jackal is great. The performance is outstanding, every scene is memorable, and my only complaint really is I just wish we got to see more of him. I mean, he's only really in the game for about 9 minutes, which is kind of disappointing. It would have been nice to see him a little bit more. But then again, he's still fantastic, and I cannot complain. So, for all of those reasons, the Jackal is gonna go in the spectacular tier. Taking a step into Far Cry 3, we're going to get started by talking about what's probably the greatest villain in this entire series, Vaas. Now, this character has gathered a reputation for being one of the most profound villains in gaming, mainly because of his numerous speeches about humanity, philosophy, and psychopathy. Almost every single cutscene with Vaas is iconic and memorable because we see firsthand how a life of manipulation, drugs, and insanity can drive someone to a path of evil, which is only further amplified by Jason Brody, who we'll get into later. Every single aspect of this character is absolute perfection. I love his writing. Michael Mando kills it with a standout performance. And thanks to Far Cry 6, Vaas even has his own DLC now. Seriously, Far Cry 6 is worth buying just to play that DLC because it's absolutely amazing. So for all of those reasons, Vaas is gonna go in the ultimate tier, and I highly doubt anyone's gonna disagree with me on that one. Coming up next, we have Buck, who has always been a very underlooked and underrated villain, in my opinion. Now, in my personal opinion, I've always found Buck to be one of the more interesting characters in this game because he's just so fucking evil. Seriously, this guy essentially tortures Jason's best friend throughout this entire portion of the game, and constantly taunts Jason with the thought of what Keith is currently going through. I've always enjoyed the history lessons Buck gives us throughout this quest, and having the QTE knife fights was a fantastic way to conclude this arc. Honestly, I have very little negatives to say about Buck, because he's easily my personal favourite side villain in this entire series. And for all those reasons, he's going to go into the ultimate tier. We're really off to a good start with these villains, holy shit. Now, okay, this is probably my hot take. I'm not sure how people feel about Hoyt in this game, but I personally don't really see the hype. Hoyt's an interesting case because I honestly don't have much to say about him. I mean, sure, he's entertaining, has so many great scenes, and makes us do some pretty crazy shit. But then again, at the end of the day, I've always seen him as the forgettable villain in Far Cry 3. Don't get me wrong, he hits all the right notes, which we will see from most of the villains going forward. His performance is bombastic and outrageously over the top, which is great to see, and his QTE boss was really fun and engaging. However, it's unfortunately just not enough to elevate him as high as the other entries. is. So for all of those reasons, he's going into the amazing tier. I was really conflicted on whether Jason Brody deserves to be on this list, because depending on what you do at the end of Far Cry 3, this guy can be just as big of a menace as the other villains. Jason in Far Cry 3 is really interesting because his story follows someone who has a degrading mentality. Someone who is exposed to consistent violence and chaos, which wraps his subconscious into embracing insanity instead of rejecting it. In Far Cry 6's Insanity DLC, we see Jason through the perspective of Vaas, and it really paints this whole character in a very different light. Because during the campaign, Jason assumes he's doing the right thing. However, as we progress further and further, the line between Jason Brody and the monster he becomes is more blurred and fractured. In a series full of so many bland and disappointing protagonists, Jason easily stands strong as Far Cry's greatest, because he's the only protagonist in this entire series that they actually try to develop. Most of the others are just mindless drones or one-note archetypes. So for all of those reasons, he's going to go in the spectacular tier. Taking a step away from the Rook Islands and into Kyrat, we're presented with what's possibly one of the greatest villains in this entire series, Pagan Min. Now, I'm just going to come out and say that Pagan is nowhere near my favourite villain in this series. However, I will absolutely acknowledge that this character is absolutely fantastic. Pagan probably has the coolest aura in this entire series. For example, the scenes where he stabs some dude in the eye, or monologues to you at his fucking dinner table are seriously up there as my favourite scenes in the entire game. And I just absolutely adore his role in the game because he's technically not really a villain. He honestly just wants the same thing as you, which is to spread Ishwari's ashes and to leave you Kyrat. Which can actually happen in the first 15 minutes of the game if you just fucking sit down and enjoy the crab rangoon. My only complaint with Pagan is that there just isn't enough of him. Because for some reason, they decided to bloat this game with mid-villains that take away from him. However, besides all of that, Pagan is awesome, which is exactly why he's going into the spectacular tier. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about the side villains in Far Cry 4, so let's just get straight off starting with Yuma. Now, Yuma in this game is really cool because she provides a lot of interesting psychedelic missions. If you ask me, this is easily my favourite thing about Far Cry 4, and I'm so glad Yuma utilizes those elements to make her a more interesting foe than someone who's just a lieutenant for Pagan Min. My issues with Yuma are that she just feels so underdeveloped, in my opinion. Seriously, when playing Far Cry 4 for the first time, I honestly expected there to be a huge boss fight with her, or something super creative, because the way they establish Yuma in her very first mission was just absolutely outstanding. Part of me just wishes they cut a few of the other characters out, so we maybe could have spent a little more time with Yuma, because she had a lot of potential to be really special, which is just disappointing. Oh, and while we're on the subject, that Depluer guy is seriously one of the most forgettable villains in this entire series. Seriously, all I know about him is he has a kid, and that's it. Such a waste of time and fucking resources, man. So for those reasons, Yuma is going to go in the wasted potential tier, and Depluer is going in the what the fuck tier. I'm not joking, I had a full section about Depluer breaking him down, but I cut it out, man. I'm not wasting time talking about fucking Depluer. Stepping away from Far Cry 4, it's time we dive into my personal favourite in this series, which is none other than Far Cry 5. Home to one of my favourite villains, Joseph Seed. Joseph functions as the leader of Eden's Gate and is probably the scariest villain in this entire series. This man single-handedly took over a state, murdered his infant child, destroyed a family, and predicted a nuclear fucking war, which all results in a broken man begging for mercy and execution. What makes Joseph Seed so compelling is the fact that he was right. All of us just assume this guy was unapologetically evil and was delusional about the reaping. However, by the end of Far Cry 5, not only is he revealed to be right, but we're shown how lonely and despair-filled Seed has become due to his overwhelming obsession. Honestly, I never really understood the hate Joseph got for his role in New Dawn, because while yes, he might not be as scary and intimidating as he was in 5, I still quite enjoy the direction they took with this character and how he literally gives us superpowers in New Dawn. So, in conclusion, Joseph Seed is awesome. His performance in both games is an absolute standout. He nails the cult archetype perfectly, and has so much screen time throughout the entire experience. I think he literally has like an hour of screen time in both games and has his own fucking DLC, which fleshes him out more than any other villain in this entire series. So for all of those reasons, I'm going to stick Joseph Seed in the ultimate tier. Coming up next, we have the Eden's Gate's lieutenants, who make up the majority of villain interactions in Far Cry 5. Let's start off with the big bad in the North Territory of Montana, who is none other than Jacob Seed. Now, Jacob essentially plays the role of War in the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and uses brainwashing techniques as a way to convert Montana's residents into soldiers for the cult militia. This is a concept which is honestly one of my absolute favourites in Far Cry 5, which comes into play multiple times where we are captured and subjected to this mind manipulation, resulting in one of the game's absolute greatest scenes. What I love the most about all three of the cult lieutenants is they genuinely have depth. Unlike Far Cry 4 or Far Cry 6, the side villains genuinely have stories to tell and can stand on their own without being filler standing between you and the main big bad. In conclusion, Jacob Seed is great. His backstory is fantastic, his performance is cold and memorable, so for all of those reasons, he's going to go in the spectacular tier. John Seed has always been my least favourite member of Eden's Gate, and it's completely personal taste, because this villain is so outrageously psychotic, which fits his role of death in the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse extremely well. I think the main reason I don't like John is he feels the least developed and one-note out of the four cult leaders, in my opinion. All of the other lieutenants have complex, elaborated stories that seriously elevate them, and make us understand how and why they found Joseph and this religion. And while yes, John does get this treatment too, it still unfortunately just feels a tad bit weaker compared to the others, or at least that's my opinion. But don't get me wrong, he's still an incredible entry who offers so many amazing scenes, is a disturbing force of evil who seriously has the game's most grotesque moments, and at the end of the day, I still really enjoy him a lot. So for all of those reasons, I'm going to stick John in the amazing tier. It's finally time we discuss the final member of Eden's Gate, who is in my opinion still the greatest female villain we've ever seen in Far Cry. Faith Seed acts as the cult's mistress who plays the role of Famine in the group, which is very fitting considering that she is essentially a presence who preys on the weakness of Montana's residents. What makes Faith such a compelling villain is by far the bliss component of her character, which actually translates to the open world gaming. For example, when exploring, you can see her dancing in the fields, she can make animals such as deers and skunks turn into bears or bisons, and while exploring her region, you can always feel her presence, which really adds a lot of immersion to this whole section of the game. However, when in the Bliss, almost every single aspect of it is elevated all the way up to 11, providing some of the game's most beautiful and awe-inspiring locales. Honestly, Faith in this game is so good to the point where she could have honestly been the main villain of her own game, because every interaction with her is so compelling. Every mission involving the Bliss is so ridiculously fun. And most importantly, her design and overall personality is something very different for Far Cry in the absolute best possible way. So for all of those reasons, Faith Seed is going to go in the ultimate tier. Okay, so stepping into the realms of Far Cry 6, we have a villain I personally was very excited to see. Now, before we talk about Anton Castillo, I just have to say that I've always been a huge Giancarlo Esposito fan. I love Breaking Bad, I love this actor in general, I love all the memes surrounding this character in the game through the marketing. Every single thing about Anton looked so promising, and it's just really disappointing that it was absolute shit. Now, don't get me wrong, Giancarlo absolutely fucking kills it here and delivers a standout performance as usual. And I honestly think Diego was a fantastic idea which creates a very unique and special dynamic for this character. However, the execution is simply all over the place. Because when the game focuses on Anton purely, it's absolutely amazing. But unfortunately, so much of Far Cry 6 is just slogging through mediocre characters and missions just to get to Anton. What makes Castillo so disappointing is how safe they play him. Almost every single scene featuring him doesn't include Danny, so there's absolutely no rivalry between the hero or the villain of this story. He's absurdly underused in a narrative that desperately needs more compelling characters. And after all the marketing surrounding him, I seriously thought that he would be utilized more in the game. In conclusion, Anton is kind of mid, which is an absolute fucking shame because he could have been so much more. So for all of those reasons, and it fucking sucks to say this, I'm gonna have to put Anton Castillo in the wasted potential tier. Okay, so for this next section, we're going to be looking at the side villains of Far Cry 6, who are all quite possibly the worst villains we've ever seen in this series. Every single one of them, with the exception of Mr. Mckay, are underdeveloped, have the charisma of a wet flannel, and ultimately stand strong as the most nothing villains we've ever seen in these games. Seriously, 3 of the 5 villains in this fucking game have no presence, it's absurd. Remember how we just talked about Far Cry 5 and how amazing those villains were? Well, guess what? Now we're back to the shitty antagonists from the Far Cry 4 and the Far Cry 1 days who have absolutely nothing interesting to explore. Let's take a look at some of these so-called villains. The first villain we encounter is Admiral Benitez, who has a grand total of 2 cutscenes, gets clowned on in the very first one, and eventually gets shot in the face. Jose Castillo, the second villain, gets clowned on again, followed by a boss which is easily the worst in the entire series. Although his death is fucking amazing, I'll admit that. And the Maria chick is just nothing. Oh, and I think there's a doctor character, but fuck it, I'm not putting him on the list, man. I've already done the canvas shit, I'm not going back to change that. They're just all so forgettable, man, and it breaks my heart to see how we went from such amazing characters to these surface level imitations of the greatness that came before. So, for all of those reasons, Admiral Benitez, Jose Castillo, Maria, fucking all of them, they're going in the what the fuck tier. Seriously, Ubisoft, what the fuck happened to your writing team? God damn. So, if you paid close attention, you would have noticed that I didn't put all of the side villains in the worst tier, because Mr. Mckay is marginally better than the previous entries mentioned. For example, he has the most screen time out of any side villain in Far Cry 6, and is easily the most developed character outside of Anton. However, despite that, he's still not great. I don't know, he suffers from the same issues with every side villain in this series. However, here it's way fucking worse because this is the age of Ubisoft that doesn't give a fuck about their games, and has let their writing team go to absolute shit. You know what? I'll give Mckay a pass this time. He made me laugh a couple of times in his cutscenes, and I unloaded like 100 shotgun shells into his corpse. So for all of those reasons, I'm going to put Mr. Mckay in the it's okay tier. Fuck it. So now we're finally going to be covering the spin-off game villains in no particular order. So let's just get straight off started with the main villains of Far Cry New Dawn, the twins. Now, I'm going to drop a controversial take here and say that the twins actually aren't that bad. But then again, I'm a huge fan of the general vibe in New Dawn. I love how colourful this world is. I love the whole Mad Max aesthetic. And Ubisoft recently made a 60 FPS patch for this game, so if you want to go back and play New Dawn in 60 FPS, you can finally fucking do that now. So that's all really good stuff. However, my main issue with the twins is that they just feel like they're trying too hard. Every single scene with them feels so artificial and fake, almost like they're cosplaying fans who are trying to imitate the aura of a Far Cry villain. Because these girls don't add anything new or show us anything we haven't already seen before. There's no unique gimmick with them being twins or anything like that. For example, they don't share any subconscious or offer any creative ideas with the concept. I don't know, man, maybe if they were conjoined twins, we could have had some freak show type dynamic that would make them genuinely creepy and intimidating. But unfortunately, the twist of them being twins doesn't go any further than the appearance, which is extremely disappointing. But besides that, they're still somewhat entertaining. I absolutely adore the whole Mad Max vibe this faction has going on. And their boss fight wasn't the worst thing I've ever played. It's just a fucking shame that they're so shallow for big bads who had so much potential. So for all of those reasons, I'm going to put the twins in the wasted potential tier. Let me say this right now. I love Far Cry Primal and will forever defend this game all the way up to my fucking grave. Far Cry Primal has this certain aura surrounding its main villains, and to be frank, it's fucking incredible. Ull and Batari look so cool, man. Like, look at these designs, look at the beauty on display. And what's better is that the entire game carries this art style. Seriously, play Far Cry Primal if you haven't already, it's absolutely amazing. Back to the villains. Ull and Batari are excellent because they both have so many unique and interesting aspects in terms of visuals. For example, they both rule over two very different regions, with the Udam being more volatile and aggressive, and the Izila being more intellectual and spiritualistic. Something worth noting is that both Ull and Batari have amazing boss fights, which is kinda strange for this series. Far Cry has always had an infamous reputation for having some of the worst fucking boss fights in gaming, so to see them actually attempt a boss formula is kind of worth noting. It's a big surprise, I'm glad they did it. Especially Batari's boss fights, that entire set piece was so fucking amazing, and is easily one of my personal favourite set pieces in the entire series. My only real complaint, and it's not even really a complaint with Ull and Batari, is that they just feel like they're all style over substance. But then again, it's a spin-off game, who gives a fuck? It's refreshing to see something that has so much style, and I'd honestly say that it works really well in this game. So for all of those reasons, I'm going to put both Ull and Batari in the amazing tier, considering they're mostly the same character and suffer from the same problems. Okay, so coming up last, we have the one and only villain in Far Cry 3's Blood Dragon, Colonel Ike Sloan. Now, I'm gonna be completely honest, I've never really been a huge fan of Blood Dragon. Don't get me wrong, I love 80s nostalgia, I love all the pop culture references, I do love and admire what Blood Dragon tries to do, but for me, in my personal opinion, I just don't really care for the experience as much as others, and that's okay. When discussing Ike Sloan, I feel almost the exact same way about this guy. I just think it's kinda mid. Don't get me wrong, he has some absolutely killer lines. I love the fourth wall breaking moments with this character, like the whole fucking Empire Strikes Back scene. It was really fun to see. And his performance is really fun and over the top, so I like it. But unfortunately, I can't really rank him that high because at the end of the day, this is literally just a parody villain. It's not trying to do anything ambitious, so for those reasons, I'm unfortunately gonna have to put Ike Sloan in the It's Okay tier. Anyways guys, that's the tier list. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. It all helps me out in the algorithm. Anyways guys, I'm pooped. I've been recording for nearly 2 hours, and I'm ready to go to bed. So hopefully I'll see you in whatever I decide to do next, and I hope you guys have a fantastic day. Take care.